Two economists are walking down the street. One says, "Hey, there's a dollar bill on the floor." The other says, "Impossible. If it were real, someone would have picked it up by now." I don't know many economy jokes. So this is going to be a long one, and we'll get back to the Economist jokes. But by way of short introduction, this one's going to sit kind of between behavioural economics, politeness theory, psychology, maths. I've been meaning to do this one for a long time. It's just got to the point where I had to get it out. The recent surge of flat earthers, anti-vaxxers, all this COVID stuff, a lot of science denial going on. So I just wanted to crystallise my own thoughts, and I thought, well, since I've suffered, you have to as well. So this is going to be an exploration of science. I'm not sure what I'm going to title it at the moment. It's going to be about science, facts, data, theories, hypothesis, a little bit of religion, a little bit of logical fallacies, a little bit about flaws in thinking, the elegance of maths, a little bit of criticism of political theory, and we're going to touch on a few deep mysteries of the universe. It's going to be epic. So Word tells me I've got 160,000 words to record, 314 pages of text. So it seemed a good place to start with language. Artificial categories, those made by humans in their discernment and insistence on slicing and dicing, do have kind of hard borders about them. It sounds wishy-washy to put it that way, insofar as language and linguistics allow. So, words, they have different meanings, different contexts and different times, so it's all kind of in flux anyway. And there is certain utility in that, especially in commerce, as Deleuze and others have made comment, that we can slice, dice, package and sell. And then, people have an idea of what quantitatively and qualitatively they're buying with their specific quantity of cash, for example. So we generate specifications on quality and quantity, size, weight, the metric system, that kind of thing that finds its way into all these treaties and trade-free zones and specifications about, what levels of quality ought to be categorized with particular standards, so that when we want to build a high rise and we want to buy some steel that's going to form the superstructure of the building, we want to be certain about its qualities. Hence agreed standards, hence commoditization, and so on and so on. That's all economics, and it's all good. Mostly, sort of. It comes back to what I've said in the STFU series as well. Perception seems to be an analog thing. Making decisions is a binary thing. Always going to be some kind of data compression or, natural phenomena. They seem to occur continuously. So when we impose a discrete category on continuous data sets, something's going to get cut off and other things included or captured. So, as I've mentioned before, science being the study of natural phenomena, it makes claim in its conclusions about what is more likely or less likely. And it's either naive or disingenuous to approach this endeavour with a hard dichotomous scalpel. It may well be that something is or is not. For example, as Feynman used to as an illustration, aliens and extraterrestrials exist or they do not. However, on the basis of data, the known facts and observations, the conclusion is that it's unlikely that any have visited Earth. Yeah, we don't get absolute truth in science, and I think it's useful to hold this in the context that many seem to be seeking absolute answers. Longing for absolute truth simplifies the universe. It reduces thought, cognitive load, and ambivalence, and it directs decisions. So where science can't give absolutes, others will claim to be able to do so. Authoritarian leaders, perhaps even some, will elevate their own hubris to the status of all-knowing. Perhaps even some might claim to know absolute knowledge from absolute divine sources. I don't know, ancient scripts, golden tablets, sacred stones, a direct connection with the big fella in the sky himself, who knows. What science does provide is what we could call a model-dependent realism. True so far. Or as I used to jest back at university days, physics is the latest pack of irrefutable lies. It was funny at the time, and I'm kind of reticent to repeat that in public, as it seems some take it literally, and then repeat the cherry-picked words from the phrase, leaving out the latest irrefutable and replacing it with a. It's not quite the same. The point is, though, there always has to be falsifiability. That is to say, within the model itself is always a contingent part or a mechanism which equates to should new data be found or facts come to light that are odds with the model or contradicts it, then the model needs to be changed to accommodate new knowledge or abandoned for a better model. The day one says, no, this is it, this is how it always shall be, and can never be overturned, is to make claims about things that we cannot and do not know. Such claims as those state that there is no fact, real or imagined, that can arise that would contradict a model. At this point it comes dogma, because we just cannot know what we will know in the future or what we'll find out in the future, and we cannot know if the model will stand up to those things as yet unknown. So science attempts to bring coherence to our experience, whereas it is said religion attempts to infuse our experience with meaning. I don't know if I'd agree. We'll get on to numbers and claims in a minute, but I recently heard an argument, or a claim, let's call it a claim, from the Christian camp that between 1901 and 2000, over 60% of Nobel laureates were Christians. Well, okay, let's take their word for it. But why stop at 2000? There's another 20 more years of data we have that's been left off. See, this is where we draw the lines on what we decide is in and what we decide is out. I wonder why. Perhaps that if the most recent 20 years were included, it would skew the results and the percentages would be much less, because the percentage of atheists in the population is increasing. And it's also worth pointing out that Nobel Prizes are given in fields such as academia, cultural and scientific advances. So in the context this was suggested, it was to infer that scientists are also Christian, specifically in regard to winning Nobel Prizes. Maybe so, but being Christian doesn't preclude the ability to use a scientific method. Being Christian doesn't imply that one can come to know something about the natural world any more or less than people of other religious persuasions or not. However, in real practical terms, and generalised to the laity, I might suggest that it does. It's a bit of a chicken and egg, bit of a nature-nurture thing. So it seems to me that some religions keep themselves very much to themselves. They keep a close-knit community, and people are kept tight close by in those communities, so they might not travel as much, they might not be exposed to as many different ideas. Some things are prescribed, some things are banned, particularly in cults, sects or extreme religions. The control of information is very high. Even in other things I've noticed where, like, I don't know what you call them. I've seen it where a young person actually has genuine inquiry about the world, and they will ask their parents or people in their community and say, I really want to understand about this thing I've noticed. And they'll say, well, you need to ask the person in our community that knows the most about these things, and then they'll recommend the local religious leader who will say, child, it is God's work. And they won't be informed, but because everybody else points to that person as the font of knowledge, that's where they go. It makes sense. It's, everyone else tells me that this person is the person that knows, and in the lack of any other option, that's where they're going to go. As such, some people just won't get to find out alternatives or different ways of thinking or different ways of seeing things, or be exposed to different facts or explanations. Again, some states and schools have even banned books, which seems, I know, maybe there are reasons to, I can't, is there real, this is a free speech thing, isn't it? It seems that there ought to be some age at which we ought not to expose young minds to particular materials. I mean, this is even an argument in science that when we teach young kids about the atom, we don't go straight to quantum theory. We start with, it's like billiard balls, and then it's like billiard balls with these electrons spinning around. Actually, it's not billiard balls at all. When they get a bit further sophisticated, it's protons and neutrons that make up the core on this atom. Many different electrons spin around in different orbits. And then, when you get to A-level chemistries, or A-level physics, actually, it's not protons and neutrons exactly. It's these things called quarks, and these electron orbits aren't really orbits. They're more like probability densities of where we're likely to find electrons if we were to be able to look. So in a way, it's all white lies along the way. So I don't know, maybe the kind of knowledge and education of the laity depends on their exit point in the education system. So yeah, as I say, some people just won't get to find out. That's life. It doesn't preclude the possibility that they won't. It's just that they may not be as likely to find out. It kind of sets the habit. In some sad way, for some, their curiosity will have been bashed out, and the same answer will be the answer for everything, which explains nothing. It's just some mysterious marker put in the place of lack of a better explanation. It's God, it's the spirits, it's the universe, it's just the way that it is. Stop asking difficult questions, child. Kind of forms a life habit. So yeah, I've heard it said that science explains the how and religion explains the why, which I think is a bastardization of the previous sentiment, coherence to explain and infusion of experience with meaning. The example given is that science explains how a heat source, such as a stove, boils the water. And in this example, the why offered is because we want a hot drink, which explains nothing. Why do you want a cup of tea? To feel relaxed or rehydrated? Okay, but why? So for me, why doesn't really explain a lot. It's more a values thing, more a qualitative thing than a quantitative thing. And I've yet to get to cynics' books. I hear a lot about those too. But I suspect that what's really meant by why is a personal reason. Why approximates to our internal value hierarchy, our moral philosophy, as it were. Again, something the provocative religious ask, if without God, where do you get your morals from? Which is, when you think about it, disturbing. In fact, I've heard such people say, in all apparent sincerity, if it were not for God, they would go on a rape and murder pillage. I've heard arguments that suggest humans would just go on a killing rampage and kill everything were it for a lack of belief in God. I can't say this is a majority view at all, far from it. You have to travel quite a way into the internet madness to find this kind of sentiment, and again, it's extreme outliers who I suspect are not entirely sincere. But anyway, to be fair, I suggest these people are, poorly educated, have borderline personality issues. It can't be a nice life thinking that everyone else who does not share your own religious belief is a rapist and a murderer. I don't really believe it, they believe it. In which case I'm left wondering why they feel they have to say it at all. It seems a very sad and impoverished mental model of the world to assume this. Besides, just from an energy consumption point of view, that much killing is exhausting. And I can't tell if they really mean it, not deep down. I think it's a front that they erect to convince people. It's a provocative and a horrible sensation in the body that is felt when you meet new people and the first question you ask, is this a rapist or a murderer? Well, if only I can convince them in God, I'll feel more comfortable about meeting new people. So it's like a very backdoor way of getting people to spread your particular solution. But, if this is the extent you have to go to prop up your argument or to demonstrate, it's not even demonstrating someone's guilty in a court of law, to persuade the jury to convict, if that's the best you have, yeah, it's courtroom lizard theory, which is basically where a prosecutor convinces the jury that unless they act, they might be the next victim of this horrible crime. And so to protect the community and their family and even them themselves, this violence has to be stopped. Action must be taken. You must find this person guilty, in brackets, regardless of whether they were the ones who actually did the crime or not, regardless of evidence that suggests they did or did not. But action must be taken, or else it could be you next time. So find this person guilty, send a message to the community, say no to this kind of thing, put this person behind bars, you make the community safer. Yeah, okay, but did the guy do it or not? Doesn't matter. And you see the same kind of rhetoric, same method of persuasion. Fear this thing, but if you turn the world to how I want to see it, the solution of this mysterious thing makes it all okay suddenly, whether it's God, whether it's putting people behind bars on the premise that it'll stop violence in the local community, regardless of whether it was this person or not who did it. Yeah, so there's a phrase for this kind of thing too. It's called preference falsification, and that's the act of communicating a preference that differs from one's true preference. The public, it seems, frequently convey, especially to researchers and survey conductors or pollsters, preferences that differ from what they truly want, often because they believe the conveyed preference is more socially acceptable. Really weird. I remember many years ago I was in the hospital for some reason and I wasn't the only one there, car crash, and of course the forms come round, tick the box for your religion, and I was surprised by the tick boxes of other people that were with me in the incident. I wondered if they really were, or whether it's because they thought their parents would see it, or because that was a socially accepted box to tick at the time. But that's how this works. We have our perceptions of what everyone else around us thinks is socially acceptable, and we tend to limit and govern our behaviours to that imagined approximation of the average of what everyone in our lives would act. And it's not necessarily true, because they're running by the same pattern that they've taken the average of all the people in their life and performed their behaviour according to the perceived average. And so everyone's acting up to this imagined or emergent thing that they think is the socially acceptable model. I mean, and we'll come back to this when we talk about politeness theory and Lex Ems. But when actually investigated, no one is actually living there, no one actually holds those beliefs, but they're acting up to some emergent average that's been perceived as desirable. And I sometimes wonder, when we get the phenomenon of some kind of like virtue signaling, I'm a better Muslim than everybody else. I live my whole life much more according to the doctrine. I'm a better Christian than all the other Christians. I live my life according to a much stricter version of the interpretation. I'm a better housewife than all y'all because I live my life according to the good housewife guide of the 1950s. It seems, again, all about seeking validation. And we talked about that in the STFU series. It's just... Anyway, so from time to time, science and religion have been used to answer the same questions. When it comes to explaining naturalistic phenomena, so far, religion has failed to produce a reliable methodology for studying natural phenomena that has produced anything close to the objectively verifiable data produced by the scientific method. So there's a bit of it does feed back into itself, so we have an observation or some strange thing we've noticed, we start to ask questions, we build a rough idea or an explanation, perhaps a hypothesis, then we design tests to qualify that hypothesis, and then we analyse the results, we reach a conclusion, we communicate that conclusion, we get other people involved, and that can spark further observations that other people get interested in asking questions about, and off we go again. In the Facebook group, did 110 videos on logical fallacies. One of them, the black and white thinking fallacy, it's where a position is offered in a kind of false dichotomy in which, in this case, science and religion are mutually exclusive, such that if science can't answer a question, then somehow, by default, religion can. It's the God of the gaps kind of thing. It is a tactic, fallacious argument, used over and over. The classic being, where did the universe come from? How did life start? Where is consciousness? And where do you get your morals? As science progresses and closes down those gaps and start answering those questions, I hope it can be seen that holding on to those gaps is to hold on to the past and put tradition, ceremony, sacred writings and ancient texts and antiquity above and in front of the desire to actually find out what's what. It's the same story as those monuments to the past and flags that are reminders about the worst events in history. Sure, move them, replace them with more inspirational ones. I've heard the complaint that this is erasing history. No. Most of these statues that we're talking about recently are not historically significant in any way, nor are they in fact historically accurate. They are not part of history. They're there to mythologize, like many other icons, symbols and brands. And in some cases, the statues, the icons, are to rehabilitate an image. It's been said, I think I noted before, those fancy car ads on TV, the really expensive high-end car ads, don't actually persuade people to buy more cars, but it rehabilitates the image of the car manufacturer. It reconfirms to someone who spent £80,000 on a car that actually, you did make a good purchase because this is the ultimate driving machine. Or Vorsprung-Dirk technique, whatever the catchline. Yeah, so it's to reconfirm the identity of the purchaser, really, that they were part of the sophisticated high-concept, upwardly mobile crowd. The ad puts the customer on a pedestal, not a prospect, but the actual customer. This is all that Baudrillard stuff, the hyperreal. We know the mythology as perpetuated through totems, icons, saints, statues, films, fancy car ads, over and above, or better than, the actual history or reality. I mean, when you look into some of it, it's quite putrid. The Redskins, look into how that got its name, it's fucking horrible. Perhaps then the statues that have recently been toppled ought to be preserved as they are now in their current state of dishevelment, they themselves becoming part of history, the marking of an epoch. Kind of perhaps the marking of the end of hyperrealism, that we realised that it's a bit of a folly. Same that we talked about in the Francis Bacon episodes as to why a white canvas with white squares painted on it fetches $100 million at auction. It's a marker of a moment in history. It was the first piece in a new epoch, a signifier that something significant had changed, the beginnings of a new era.